A young woman finds a demon's mirror that grants her any wish, but in exchange for each request a soul of someone close to her will be absorbed in a frightening way. Today we're going to recap the story of the movie Mirror Mirror from 1990. While eliminating her twin sister with a knife, Mary feels the walls of her room shake and suddenly the portal that had been opened in the mirror disappears. A few years later, the house is empty, so Lily and Emmeline have to move the family's belongings out, as the new owners are moving in the next day. While rummaging through some old boxes found on the estate, Emmeline comes across a diary written by Mary Weatherworth in 1939. At this point, Lily says she's late for an appointment on the other side of town, so the old woman assures her that she can handle all the mess by herself. After Lily leaves the house, Emmeline finds some old books on the occult and dark magic and puts all those items in a box to be taken to her store. Before leaving, she gives a card from her store to the delivery man who will be moving the boxes and asks him to deliver them to that address. Among the items that will be taken to the store is the mirror where Mary saw the portal close years ago. The next day, Susan Gordon and her daughter arrive at the house to see their new home, but Megan isn't too happy about the change. While Mrs. Lily is presenting the second floor to mother and daughter, Susan spots the old mirror and asks the realtor to send someone to remove it. However, Megan is fascinated by the mirror, so Lily says that the item is part of the inventory of the family that lived in the house and is for sale. Upon hearing this, Susan decides to buy the mirror for her daughter, in the hope that she will feel less dissatisfied with the change. The next morning, while walking through the school corridors, Nikki meets Charlene, her competitor for the position of class president. After hearing her opponent's taunts, the young woman enters the classroom and, soon after, Megan shows up to meet her new classmates. When she enters the classroom, the girl is laughed at by most of the students, who make no effort to hide the strangeness of her style. At this point, Megan begins to feel out of place and accidentally runs over a skeleton that was being used as study material in science class. Embarrassed by her fall, she runs out of the room and Nikki decides to go after her to try and ease the situation. That afternoon, the girls take a point class together and Megan reveals that her father perished 4 months ago, so her mother decided to leave Los Angeles and move to that small town. Curious to know the information contained in Mary Weatherworth's diary, Mrs. Emmeline decides to read it and discovers that the young woman has locked a treacherous demon inside her mirror. After several failed attempts to destroy the creature, Mary realized that the only way to get rid of it was to imprison it. Just then, the old woman hears someone entering her store and comes across Mrs. Lily, who has come to inform her that Susan has decided to keep the mirror that was in the house. After giving the message and Susan's phone number, the woman leaves and Emmeline goes through the boxes looking for the occult books she found in the house. That afternoon, when Megan gets home, she finds her mother crying in the kitchen next to one of the family dogs. According to Susan, the animal was found lifeless a few minutes ago on the second floor of the house and, on seeing it, Megan is so shaken that she decides to go to her room. Suddenly, someone rings the doorbell and Susan opens the door. At that moment, she meets Bill, the cemetery worker she called to collect her dog's body. When she entered her room, Megan looked in the mirror and wished with all her heart that her father was there with her. She then looks in the mirror and says she hates the way she looks, because she believes her classmates laughed at her because they thought she was ugly. Frustrated with all the changes that are happening in her life, Megan decides to go to sleep and, in the middle of the night, she receives a visit from her father. The young woman immediately gets up to hug him, but when she looks at Gordon's face, she realizes that her father's face has been completely destroyed and she panics. Terrified, the girl decides to run away and orders him to leave. Suddenly, Susan appears to help her daughter and Megan is relieved to see her mother. As she hugs her, the young woman realizes that it was all just a bad dream and, before going back to her room, Susan advises her daughter to go back to sleep. The next morning, when she arrives at school, Megan meets Jeff, Charlene's boyfriend. Once again, the young woman doesn't miss the opportunity to make fun of Megan's appearance, but Nikki shows up just in time and decides to accompany the girl to class. A few hours later, while they are watching a rehearsal for a play to be performed at school, Megan tells her about the nightmare she had the night before and Nikki says that perhaps her father's ghost has come to visit her. According to her, there are rumors that Mary Weatherworth, the former resident of that house, performed various kinds of witchcraft. One day, her twin sister Elizabeth perished, but her body was never found. At the end of class, when she gets home, Megan meets Bill and finds out that her mother has invited him to join them for dinner. However, during the meal, Susan and her guest begin to exchange glances and are attacked by an infestation of flies that are emerging from inside the mirror. While eating his chicken drumstick, Bill comes across numerous maggots and abruptly gets up. When he looks at his plate again, the man realizes that there is nothing wrong with his food and decides to leave, as he believes he is suffering from hallucinations. According to the Book of Witchcraft found by Emmeline in the Weatherworth family home, centuries ago, witches used mirrors to create portals between the human world and the world of demons. They used to summon these creatures to help them in their evil work. By granting the most varied kinds of wishes, these demons conquered their victims and turned them into their puppets. To prevent these demons from passing through the portal, it is need to use a black cloth to cover the mirror. At school, during the break, Kim hands Nikki an invitation to attend Charlene's party, where she will try to convince the students to elect her as class president. Initially, Nikki refuses the invitation, but she knows that this is a great opportunity for Megan to socialize with the other students, so she decides to accompany her. When she arrives at the cafeteria, the young woman hears some students mocking her and feels extremely uncomfortable. Among the members of Charlene's group, Jeff is the only one who refuses to make fun of the new girl and feels bad for seeing Megan having to go through all that injustice. While the girl is mulling over her feelings of humiliation, the mirror in her room begins to bleed and suddenly a large amount of blood drips from Charlene's nose. Just then, the family's other dog starts barking at Megan's bedroom door and Susan shows up to try and find out what's going on. However, when the woman opens the door, all the blood that was dripping down the mirror disappears. After what happened to Charlene in the cafeteria, Megan begins to wonder if she has magical powers, as she feels that the nosebleed was her fault. When he hears this theory, Ron, Nikki's boyfriend, starts to believe that Megan is just a weirdo and decides to leave. In an attempt to bring her friend back to reality, Nikki invites her to study together. The next day, when they return to school, Megan comes across Charlene and her friends dressed in black and soon realizes that they are trying to provoke her. That afternoon, Teacher Anderson decides to administer a test and walks around the classroom to check on the students' development. However, as he passes Megan's desk, he notices that she is unable to solve the questions and calls her out in front of the whole class. Anderson then returns to his chair and suddenly begins to feel short of breath. When they realize that their teacher can't breathe, the students get worried and call the emergency services. Luckily, the doctors show up in time to help him and Anderson has to be taken to hospital. At this point, Megan's suspicions become certainties and she becomes convinced that she has superpowers. When she arrives home, she finds her mother dressed like a teenager and this bothers her deeply. Quickly, the girl goes into the bedroom and sees a streak of blood running down the mirror. Even though she was frightened, Megan approached and began to spread the blood with her fingers. At that moment, she hugs the mirror and feels the demon's hands hugging her back. After ingesting a drop, the young woman hears someone ringing the doorbell and goes downstairs to open the door. At this point, she runs into Emmeline and the woman informs her that she is responsible for looking after the Weatherworth family estate. According to the woman, a mirror was left in the house by mistake and she went there to get it. However, Megan says that she will keep the mirror and asks Emmeline to leave. That evening, the students attend a party at Charlene's house and everyone is surprised to see Megan's new appearance. Despite still wearing black clothes, the young woman looks much prettier than usual and Jeff is enchanted by her beauty. On seeing her friend, Nikki is happy to have her company and compliments her appearance. Just then, Jeff appears and asks Megan to dance. After the dance, Megan rushes to tell her friend the news and says that her feelings for Jeff are mutual. However, a few hours later, at the end of the party, the young woman spots Jeff in the car with his girlfriend and, when she sees him kissing Charlene, she is furious. At that moment, Megan manages to enter the young man's mind and he orders his girlfriend to get out of the car. The young man then goes to her house and reveals that he can't stop thinking about Megan. On hearing this, the girl decides to let him in and takes him up to her room. As the couple kiss, Jeff begins to feel confused and decides to leave to think about it before he does anything stupid. When she realizes that her magic wasn't strong enough to make him fall in love with her, Megan starts crying and asks the mirror what she should do. Upon hearing this, Jeff becomes even more frightened and says that Charlene was right when she said that Megan is crazy. Furious, the young woman decides to take revenge on the young man for breaking her heart and suddenly a pair of demonic hands appear to grab him. As Jeff is pulled into the mirror, Megan watches intently and, when the young man falls lifeless to the floor, she orders the demon to get rid of his body. Hearing all those screams, Susan gets worried and runs to Megan's room to find out what's going on, but the girl asks her mother to go to sleep and says she'll do the same. When she returns to her room, Susan confesses to Bill that she is worried about her daughter, as she seems to be feeling very lost and lonely. The next day, Charlene is elected class president and, seeing the sadness in Nikki's eyes, Megan says she'll help her turn things around. That morning, while Megan is at school and Susan leaves for work, Emmeline decides to break into the house to retrieve the mirror, because she knows that the object harbors a very dangerous evil force. At this point, she is greeted by the family dog and climbs the stairs to get to Megan's room. Emmeline then takes a black cloth out of her bag to cover the mirror, but when she touches it, her palms are bruised and she decides to run away. While the woman is hurrying down the stairs, the dog enters the room and becomes the latest victim of the demonic mirror. Later, during her swimming lesson, Megan sees the perfect opportunity to get rid of Charlene and uses her powers to try to drag her to the bottom of the pool. However, the young woman manages to swim to the edge and, after almost drowning, she attacks Nikki, believing that it was she who was trying to drown her. Witnessing the attack, the teacher decides to intervene and throws Charlene out of the pool. Furious, the girl goes to the changing room and, while showering, she realizes that the water has run out. Suddenly, the young woman hears some noises coming from the pipe and once again tries to open the shower. Just then, a large amount of gas starts leaking from the pipe and the girl tries to run out of the bathroom to call for help, but the door is locked. Desperate, Charlene screams for help, but no one can hear her and the young woman's body begins to be burned by the smoke. Minutes later, at the end of the swimming lesson, the group of girls walk to the bathroom to take a shower and, when they open the door, they all panic as they come across Charlene's body covered in blood. After what happened to the young woman, all the students began to think that Nikki was involved, as she had reason to want to get rid of her competitor. Everyone is still shaken by the incident when Megan approaches her friend and congratulates her on becoming class president. Upon hearing this, Nikki is surprised by the girl's insensitivity and, after asking a few questions, she discovers that Megan was involved in that accident. Appalled by such cruelty, Nikki says that Megan is crazy and walks away because she doesn't want to be friends with the woman. When she gets home, Megan finds her mother and Susan reveals that her other dog has also disappeared. Despite being worried about the animal, she tries to keep her attention on her daughter and invites her out for dinner that evening. However, Megan says she's busy and, unfortunately, will have to decline the invitation. Upon hearing this, Susan begins to feel guilty that her daughter is drifting apart and says that she will do everything in her power so that they can rebuild their relationship. After thanking her mother for her words, Megan goes to her room and finds a black cloth on the floor, then realizes that someone has been there. The next day, when she arrives at school, Megan tries to make things right with Nikki, but the young girl spends the whole day trying to avoid her. When she realizes that Nikki no longer wants to be her friend, Megan decides to use her new powers against her and starts making her feel severe stomach pains. While Nikki is paralyzed, unable to move, Megan reveals that the mirror in the Weatherworth family home has given her powers and can do the same for Nikki. Megan then confesses that she was responsible for eliminating Charlene and has no idea that Kim is inside one of the cabins listening to the whole conversation. While trying to convince Nikki that she committed a crime to help her become president, Megan lets slip that she also eliminated Jeff, but assures her that in his case it was an accident. As Nikki is her only friend, Megan doesn't want to risk losing her and tries to convince her to reconnect. Afraid of becoming the next victim, Nikki says she's busy that night, but says she'll call her friend as soon as possible. As soon as Nikki comes out of the bathroom, Megan opens the cabin where Kim is hiding and the young woman realizes that the woman knew she was there all along. After being attacked by Megan, Nikki goes to meet Ron and asks to borrow his car. Before leaving, she asks her boyfriend to go home and wait for her. After eliminating Kim with a shard of glass, Megan begins the second stage of her evil plan. Meanwhile, Nikki drives to Mrs. Perlilly's house and asks the woman to answer some questions about the Weatherworth family home. After getting all the information she needs, Nikki decides to go to Emmeline's store and discovers that it was Elizabeth who summoned the demon and imprisoned it in the mirror. In an attempt to stop the demon, Mary decided to eliminate her twin sister, but now the mirror has a new puppet. According to Emmeline, Megan isn't a bad person, she's just under the strong influence of the devil. To save her, Nikki will have to get rid of whatever is inside that mirror. When the young woman is about to leave, Emmeline says that she will find someone to help them and advises Nikki not to go into that house alone. The woman then calls Father Jeffrey, but before she can complete the call, she receives a visit from Megan and ends up being eliminated by her. That afternoon, Ron is at home preparing his sandwich in the kitchen when he hears a noise coming from the second floor and decides to go there, as he believes Nikki has just arrived. When he enters the bathroom, he finds his girlfriend's body submerged in the bathtub and helps her out. While Ron is trying to get her to the hospital, Nikki starts kissing him and suddenly she tries to drown him in the bathtub. Just then, the real Nikki appears and starts looking for her boyfriend. What the young woman doesn't realize is that, upstairs, Ron is being attacked by a copy created by Megan and ends up being eliminated. When she finds her boyfriend's lifeless body, Nikki panics and soon finds her clone smiling creepily behind the door. After seeing her, the creature disappears and the young woman hears the phone ring. When she answers it, Nikki hears Megan's voice and asks why she's doing all this. At this point, the girl reveals that Emmeline has perished and asks Nikki to meet her at her house. At the end of the call, Megan hears her mother knocking on the door and Susan invites her to dinner, but the young woman says she's not hungry and asks her to leave. Minutes later, Megan feels sorry for the way she has been treating her mother over the last few days and decides to go down to the kitchen to talk to her. However, when she tries to open the door, the young woman discovers that she is locked inside the room and soon realizes that the mirror is planning to eliminate her mother. While doing the dishes, Susan notices that her disposer is jammed and decides to stick her hand inside to find out what's blocking it. Just then, the shredder starts up on its own and Megan hears the desperate cries of her mother, who is having her fingers destroyed. When she finally manages to get her hand out of the sink, Susan collapses in pain and Megan is faced with a huge amount of black paint pouring out of the mirror. Soon afterwards, Nikki appears and, on entering the house, she finds Susan, who ends up dying from the enormous amount of blood loss. Cautiously, the girl climbs the stairs and, on entering the bedroom, finds Megan sitting on the bed. On seeing the mirror, Nikki immediately tries to break it with a chair, but soon discovers that the object is indestructible. Suddenly, the girls feel a strong gust of wind trying to suck them into the mirror and decide to run away. When they reach the first floor, they try to open the door, but all the exits are locked. While trying to find a way through, Nikki realizes that Megan has disappeared and returns to her room to look for her friend. But when she gets there, Megan disappears right before her eyes. At that moment, the typhoon is interrupted and everything returns to normal. Concerned, Nikki enters the room and, when she turns on the lights, she finds Megan's body on the floor. After losing several important people, Nikki can't resist the urge to wish for everything to go back to the way it was before and ends up being transported a few decades into the past. When she opens her eyes, the young woman realizes that she has been taken to the same scene where Mary eliminates her twin sister and suddenly a demonic creature begins to emerge from inside the mirror. However, minutes later, the portal closes and the monster is sent back to its world. So Nikki covers the mirror with the black cloth to prevent the creature from terrorizing the humans again. So what did you think of this movie? Leave it in the comments below. And if you liked the video, like and subscribe for more movie recaps. See you next time.